English Canadians are almost 10 times more likely to be bilingual if they live in Quebec than if they live in another province.
If you live in Canada or anywhere nearby and you want to learn French, probably the best thing you can do is spend as much time in Quebec as possible.
But Quebec is a big province, and there are a lot of places you could go.
In this video, we're going to talk about whether Montreal, the largest city in Quebec, is a good language learning destination, especially compared to other cities and towns in the province.
For some quick background on us, we took French classes through grade school and university, but never felt as comfortable in the language as we wanted.
The closest we ever came was during a few different multi-week French immersion programs that we did over the years, which inspired us to take the plunge and move to Montreal at the end of 2019 for a more prolonged French experience.
The obvious question to ask when deciding whether Montreal is a good place to learn French is what the language situation is like there. How French is Montreal exactly?
The pie chart on the screen shows the language demographics of the Montreal region. Dark blue represents native speakers of French, light blue indicates second language speakers of French, and gray shows people who can't speak French.
It's easy to see here that French is the dominant language in Montreal. Native speakers of French are a clear majority of the population, and most other people can speak French as a second language.
For comparison, though, let's switch to the language demographics of Quebec City, which is the next largest city in the province and is more representative of what you'll find outside of Montreal.
So, based on this, Montreal is French, but it's noticeably less French than Quebec City, where native speakers make up an overwhelming majority and almost no one can't speak French at all.
What this means is that, based on language alone, Montreal is a good place to learn French, but it's not the best place. This can be seen in census data on bilingualism. 63% of English speakers in Montreal are bilingual, compared to 85% in Quebec City.
But the language learning part isn't the only thing you have to consider, especially if you plan on living there instead of just visiting.
Montreal is a center for English universities and hospitals in Quebec, and even the most dedicated second language learner still probably prefers education and healthcare in their native language.
Also, unless you work remotely, at some point you'll need a local job. The job market of Montreal is bigger, more diverse, and more accessible to anglophones than other places in Quebec.
One part of this is that English is more likely to be used in the workplace. 29% of people in Montreal have a job where they use English as much as French or more, compared to just 4% in Quebec City.
Another part of this accessibility is that for positions that are mostly French, which are still a majority of jobs, it's probably safe to say that employers in Montreal are relatively used to hiring and supporting people who are still perfecting their French.
For example, you're probably more likely to find employer-sponsored French courses in Montreal than in cities where most employees are native speakers already.
Also, even though the numbers we saw before show that English speakers in Montreal are less likely to be bilingual than English speakers in Quebec City, they are still way more likely to be bilingual than English speakers elsewhere in Canada.
So based on all of that, here are our recommendations. If you're only able to make a short-term visit to Quebec, then you're better off avoiding Montreal.
Going somewhere else in the province will allow you to better maximize the amount of French exposure and practice that you get in the short time that you're there.
We've mentioned Quebec City so far, which we can recommend based on personal experience, but Trois-Rivières, Saguenay, and to a lesser extent Sherbrooke are other examples of places in Quebec that are more French than Montreal.
On the other hand, if you're looking to settle down and live in a French-speaking environment for a longer period of time, our default recommendation is Montreal.
It's not the most French place in Quebec, but it's an accessible French city that will still give you a lot more French exposure and practice than you're probably getting in your English-speaking city now.
This is especially true if you're careful about which area of Montreal you live in, which we'll talk about in a later video.